Hello and welcome to Outpost Virtual Series. Today we'll be live streaming a Skillshare with Adele Wiejaczka. My name is Robert and I would like to thank you all for tuning in. Outpost is continuing to launch new virtual events each week to help keep our community active, engaged, and connected during these times. This Friday we'll be live streaming a Skillshare led by Sabi Kerr on freedom from limiting beliefs. So I encourage you all to go follow our Outpost Facebook page so you can RSVP and get updates on the new events that we'll be rolling out for next week as well. The topic for tonight's Skillshare is building a brand that doesn't suck, led by Adele. Adele is CEO and creative director of her marketing agency, Live Large Design, and she travels the world to help social and environmental entrepreneurs with strategic branding. She also has a course platform, Live Large Tribe, teaching new designers the path to effective branding and website conversion. So I will drop a link to her information so that you guys can all stay connected with her after the event. Also, feel free to say hello and what part of the world you guys are tuning in from. We always love to hear from our community. If you guys have any questions throughout the Skillshare, don't be shy, leave them in the comment section and we will make sure to get them all answered. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Adele to kick things off, and everyone enjoy your Skillshare.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Right. Pleasure having you on tonight, Adele.
Thank you so much. All right, we're gonna jump into my presentation here. I have a little video to kick us off, and we'll just get rolling. So why should you guys listen to me in the first place? I have a graphic design master's degree and have built a brand over the past 8 years. I now teach graphic designers the freedom designer mentality and how to monetize as creators. And what I really specialize in is the branding process. So I love determining brand design, brand strategy, and brand voice to help organizations and businesses best exude their mission and purpose out to the world for visibility in a way that will attract their authentic clients. All right, let's look at the roadmap of where we're headed today. The first thing that's important for branding is always going to be clarity. So we're going to check out why to brand in the first place, and then we'll go over some clarification for your brand purpose. Then we'll delve into some market research and audience profiling, and then we'll check out your brand voice personality. And then we get into the really fun stuff, visuals, that's why you're here. We'll check out some memorable logos, professional typography and fonts, color palettes, and then secondary aesthetics and on-brand supporting graphics. And lastly, we'll look at some tools to best support you. I believe in branding because branding is how the world's going to perceive you. If you don't brand yourself, then people are going to brand you in their minds, and it might not be what you intend. So I'm all about being intentional about your branding so that you can best speak and attract your tribe and sales along with that. So today we're going to go through a quick and dirty branding process. I know we're moving into a version of the world where more and more people are stepping into remote working. And I know that lots of people are figuring out how to validate particular business models. So maybe you don't have initial budget to throw into the branding process. Listen, I get it. And so today I'm teaching a DIY technique. And I think there's a specific way you can go about it to keep it simple, to validate your idea, and to start monetizing without putting too much budget into the brand itself. In fact, we're going to focus on putting zero budget into your brand. All right, I'm still figuring out some technology here as we go. So let's see here. Perfect. Cool. So
as with branding, we always start with a solid foundation of understanding who you're speaking to and your brand purpose. So it's what I really encourage you guys to start with, even if you're branding yourself. I don't know if I can move this. So clarifying like what you want to say with your brand through who you're speaking to specifically and what you're selling is the key to the clarity on your brand. So what problem are you solving in the world? What are you excited to support people with? What are you actually selling? Are you selling a product or a service? And then you want to make sure you've mastered the needed skill set so you actually can leverage the right team or yourself as you're building maybe a freelance platform or putting out a new product into the world. So these concepts are really simple, but it's important to start with the baseline understanding and clarity of why you're actually creating this brand. I think what happens sometimes is people get pretty excited about visuals and kind of the shiny fun stuff, which of course I love, that's what I do, but it takes the effort of this brand foundational piece to make sure that you're building it on a solid foundation. So I promised you guys that I would share 5 things that non-designers tend, like traps that they tend to fall into. And one of the first things is a lack of clarity in their foundation or a lack of clarity in who they're speaking to with their audience. So I really encourage adequate time spent to figure out this piece of the puzzle so that you can move into the market or online sector and also this DIY branding process, knowing who you're trying to talk to. It will really simplify things for you. Another thing I like trying to figure out for my clients and that you can figure out for yourself is just what sort of business mentality do you have? You can go to this link and you can take a little quiz to figure out if you're the artist, the manager, or the entrepreneur. I found this to be really helpful for me to understand my entrepreneurial approach and where my head is as I'm trying to build businesses. So of course I'm the artist, not just because I create things, but I love being in the process of building the materials for the business. And as I've grown my team, I've actually evolved more into the manager side of things. So I think this is an important foundational piece too, to understand your unique skill sets, how they relate to the brand that you're trying to create, and where you might need extra help. So kind of a little bit divergent to this DIY brand process, but nonetheless, I think really important in understanding yourself and how you're going to be approaching your brand. And I always like to say hustle and flow because there's a lot of hustle that we put into new businesses, but I also think there's a flow to following your intuition, to understanding how you fit with the brand and trusting like your approach to specific problems and eventually your visuals. So third step here is market research. As designers, we always start with research. So we're going to start discovery usually with visual inspiration. So we kind of geek out on Pinterest. I make a board for everything. And even before you get to the visuals, you want to be looking at who are the competitors in your industry. This is a great place to understand how you can build a brand that fits within your industry, but hopefully will also stand out. So for example, if you're in the medical industry, you can go and look and see that there's a lot of cool blues that are being used. That's a really trustworthy color. There's gonna be clean lines and simplicity, like relating to sterile environment. So if you were to roll in with, all sorts of organic, really, let's say like maybe hippie aesthetics or something like that, it might not fit that industry, or potentially you could shift your visuals to fit the industry, but have a little bit of a different vibe. So go and see what other people are creating. You can look if you're in your physical proximity in your location and figure out what visuals people are using. And then you also can look in your online sector too. This kind of just depends on what sort of business you have and platform that you're building. The next piece is, why do you feel aligned to your market of choice? I think this is part of that clarity piece where you can really get some understanding of why you're passionate to work with your particular market and audience. And I think this is an important piece for you to build that connection with your audience. And I make this one little bullet point here, but I would say who is your ideal audience? This is one of the biggest pieces of building a brand, whether you build professionally with a designer or whether you're DIY building your pieces. A lot of people, as they look at their brand materials, they care about maybe what color they're using because it's their favorite color, or they don't like that color, so they might not use it, when really it's all about speaking to your audience. So despite my age and my gender and where I'm from, I always look to my clients. We work with a lot of nonprofits and NGOs, particularly in Alaska. So I'm looking at the people that work at those nonprofits, what sort of aesthetics are they attracted to? And how can I speak to them in a language that relates to them? And I always say with branding, the goal is actually to be attracting your tribe. And I call it tribe because I think when we build businesses on shared values, hopefully the connection with your audience is much more than just a transactional environment. Hopefully they actually have shared values with you across sectors. So for me, freedom is a huge shared value. So I have that in my team in Live Large Design. I have that with my clients. And I also have that with my new platform I'm creating. It's actually called the Freedom Designer. And it's for graphic designers wanting to live and work from anywhere in the world and also live out the creative side. So the values that I have help inform a lot of the decisions that I make and also carry over to my audience. And they tend to also align with those values. And the cool thing about it is it makes our relationship a lot more in flow and at ease because we care about the same things in the world. So I have my undergrad was in environmental education. I come out of an outdoor wilderness conservation background. So when I work with environmental nonprofits in Alaska, it's a really easy connection with them because I have an understanding of the background of what they're working on. And it also builds more trust between us because, they also know that I understand what they're working on. So I recommend that you get really down and dirty with your audience and start to understand how they view the world, what words are they using, what are their pain points. This is a really big one. Where do they live? What are their ages? What do they look like? What values do they have? Their income. And really, when it comes to the branding process, we spend a significant amount of time and effort on just this piece. And what you can do is actually create little avatars for your audience, which can be kind of fun. You can give them names and, you can actually pretend you're speaking to them. And I think if you make them into avatars and have a personality, then it helps you come up with verbiage that will hopefully translate to them. And once we get to visuals, hopefully the visuals as well. I find that without creating that persona, that it can be kind of hard to visualize in your mind who you're talking to. And it becomes like, it's almost like a sterile, non-connective, disconnect versus if we turn them into characters that we can really get excited about. So yeah, let's move into this next step. I love this quote just about adding more value than anyone else. And I think it is really important to fall in love with your customer, not your product. A lot of us are really excited about what we do. And I definitely am very guilty of that. Like I love designing, I love logos and websites, but really most of the clients that come to me, they connect to me as a person, typically these things that we've already talked about, values, the connection that I have with my particular marketplace. There's a lot of crossover in our interests, like outdoors and that sort of thing. And so it's not that it's just the design work that they're coming to me for, although that's what they need. What makes me get up in the morning is more so building a connection with my clientele. So I just like throwing that in there. Okay, so brand personality, I know we're still not at the visuals yet, but all of these pieces are going to make the visual piece so much easier. And I think one of the other mistakes that non-designers make is going directly to the visuals. So they skip all these beginning steps and they just like go into Canva and start making things and picking a color palette, but it's all arbitrary because they don't have any understanding of what they're trying to create. And so when you do that, you don't have any of the depth to understand why you would be making certain decisions. And the whole point of this workshop is there is a lot of information out there that you guys can attain quite easily that can help you build a brand. It's not that just because you're not a graphic designer, it doesn't mean you can't make informed decisions around your visuals. It just has to be in such a way that you're building on that solid brand foundation of clarity of who you're speaking to and what you're selling, so that then when you're making these choices down the line around colors and visuals, that it's going to relate to that particular market and sector. So an important piece is your brand voice, your brand personality. So it's worth it to take some time to figure out what that story is. For me, I'm very connected to Alaska and my background, even though I'm here in Bali. So I bring that into all of my brand pieces. You'll see pictures of me in Alaska with my dog or hiking, and also pictures of me surfing here. But I bring in a lot of like the outdoors into my materials because it's a big part of who I am. And it's a big part of who I work with. So environmental platforms. And the joy of stories is that A, they're memorable, and then B, they evoke emotion in people, which is really, we're all, human to human connectors. We want to build relationships with people. It's what we're wired for. So the stories is what builds past a service and a product into something that we really can connect with as an individual. And from this, your brand personality, your story, your background, what I like to encourage you to do is come up with keywords. And these actually can become the segue from all this foundational work and your brand personality into a visual brand language. So for me, some of my keywords might be active, they might be bold, they might be travel, they might be outdoors. And so come up with some of these keywords, and then you can start researching your visual language. So now we're making that segue over into the visuals, but we really need an understanding of your unique brand story and how that connects to your audience that you've already clarified, so that you can come up with some really cool, exciting keywords. I usually recommend 3. Oh, this is a little pixelated. Sorry about that. I wanted to show a brand we worked on, and unfortunately you can't read it. But yeah, they are very sassy and fun and bold. And so if you could read this, it just talks about like, where Pineapple Hustle is where you go and it's the death of your day job, and they don't give a fuck about anything and things like this. And their language is that sassy, bright persona. And then we cross that over into aspects of their visual brand and their color palette and what their logo and what is being used. So, and also equally important is defining what you are not. So they are not lazy or boring or sedentary. And after this piece, I know it looks really simple on 2 pages, as after this is defined, like who you are, spend just some time writing a paragraph about how you would voice your personality through your brand. Once that's nailed out, it becomes really easy to reflect on how best to represent that personality. All right, so we're gonna move into logos. So we've made that segue. We've figured out some keywords that we want to connect our brand personality to our visuals. When I say memorable logo here, we're going to delve into a DIY version. So this is where it's really important to understand your ability or non-ability as a designer. And I'm not asking you guys to be able to work in Illustrator today and figure out how to make a vector logo that's going to last you 10 years. When we work with our clients in our agency, we spend a 5 to 7 week process to go through a branding package. So that takes time to work through. What we're trying to help you create today is a professional, non-embarrassing brand. So you don't want to expect yourself to be able to make some, I had a client once and they did dance classes and they self-made like this dance person, and it just was horrible. Like it didn't at all look like it. And it's just hard because if you're not a designer, if you don't know how to use the technology, then trying to make a logo is really going to be difficult for you. When we design in our agency, we iterate about 100 different sketches in our design team, and we have designers with all sorts of different aesthetics. So we have a lot of ability to explore and figure out what might work best. And I say all this just to try to warn you away from complicated solutions. So I'd say that's another one of the big 5 mistakes and traps that non-designers fall into, is they think that it's possible for them to be creating a really dynamic, intricate, gradient-filled logo. And I just want to encourage non-designers to keep it simple. There's no need to go in that direction in the beginning, or if you're not a designer. So I think it's much more important to come off professional, to keep things clean, and yeah, not get too complicated. So let's jump in. So here's just an example of a brand that we created. So you can see that they have a logo, and then their pieces evolve into every aspect of their brand. So their website, their verbiage, the imagery that they use. And I like to give you examples that we've created as well, so you can kind of get an understanding of graphics and additional imagery stylizations that you can build into your brand as well, because I'm going to share some resources where, you know, there's tons of resources out there for free for you guys to be gathering visual information to be able to use. Okay, so my suggestion for everybody here today, if you're not a designer, is to do simple type-based logos. You want to choose a professional typeface or font. And I like showing these examples because they work great. You know, they're well-known brands that have created clean, clear, simple executions of a logo that they use. And there's nothing that limits that particular logo. I would argue that if you try to overcomplicate your logo, that's actually what's going to limit you from being able to evolve into a professional setting with it. So that's one of the next traps that non-designers fall into, is overly ornamental visuals, which can be really challenging. So with that, I just mean like way too many, you know, flowers on a page, or, you know, trying to cram too much into a logo without the ability to make it sleek and simple and clean and clear. So I think the best solutions are the simplest that are needed. And especially if you're a new brand or business, you're not necessarily looking to create the most dynamic logo or create the most compelling brand. You're probably trying to make some sales. You're probably trying to validate your idea. And to do that, you just need to have a professional, clean, clear platform where people can trust that you're not full of shit. So yeah, definitely use clean, simple fonts. Let's see what I have on the next page. So this rolls us right into professional typography. Of course, I have access to a lot of different typefaces and fonts, and you might or might not, depending on what you use. Typography is a really dynamic, deep subject. There's a math in how you set type so that it's best digestible by an audience. So for example, we design books. We have a book design label, and how the type is set throughout the entire book is very specific so that it's easier for the viewer to read it. And it also has a personality related to the subject or the content. You guys aren't going to become typography experts necessarily, so you don't need to know all of these things. What you can do is Google, like go into your research mode and figure out some of those keywords that you already worked on earlier in the process, and figure out what you want to say with your font. So here's just a really simplistic version of some ideas of what serifs are. Very traditional fonts. They tend to be like have a historical feel to them. Sans serif are clean, modern. We use them more on computers. That's even all you need to know necessarily. If you have a very feminine, or, you know, particular industries are well suited for a script font. modern, these are all sans serif. And then down here is going to be your kind of more decorative ornamental fonts that I would recommend that you use with caution. Typically, you're going to be better off using a sans serif. If I were just to guess what you were going to use, probably most of you are in an online digital marketing sector, perhaps. And so a clean, great sans serif is going to work fine for you. And if you go back to these examples that I showed you, a lot of these, the majority of them are sans serif. So only one is a serif font. And I also find that sans serif fonts are easier for the non-designer to utilize in a way that comes off clean and simple and clear. So that would be my recommendation. There's a bunch of fonts you don't want to use. You guys have probably seen the Papyrus, SNL Skit, Comic Sans, Bradley Hand, any of these fonts that people use that are heavily, ornamental and pretend to say something. Just stay away from them. They're gonna take away from your validation, from your professional vibe that you're trying to create, and it's really unnecessary. We think Papyrus says something, but it really doesn't, because it's all about like how that's applied. So when I teach new designers in university, I see a lot of times they're trying to use really ornamental fonts. So this is another trap people fall into, because they don't really know how to design yet. And so they'll use the ornamental font to try to say something, instead of trying to look to their brand foundation, look to their keywords, and look to their visual inspiration to really build brand pieces that work together to help convey a look and a feel that relates to their brand foundation. And what I would say is that you can't say everything in a font. So if you can't do that, then I recommend keeping it professional, clean, simple, clear, and then you can move on from there to bring in more of the brand personality and some of the additional pieces. So I love the saying, we call it KISS, keep it stupid simple. So what is the least viable needed direction or solution that you can come up with for your brand? So use a sans serif modern font for a modern, clean look. I recommend using Google fonts. They're not all the most amazing fonts, but they're free. And then they would be free for you to use on websites, which is really nice as well, so that you can create a system that is cohesive between your print and your online materials. The other thing, don't add like drop shadows and gradients. That's just going to detract from the cleanness of what you're trying to create. And again, these are all just like are tools that people fall back to when they don't really know what to do. So I am gonna give you guys a cheat sheet if you'd like. So you guys can email me after this talk and I'll send it out to you if you're interested. And I have all these tips in there so you can reference it later. And I also have some typography lists as well, some to use and some not to use. So you can look at those and decide what you want to work with. And there are some other really cool free font locations online for you to be able to access some cool fonts that you can play with. Yeah, all right. So after let's say you've created your simple, clean, clear type-based logo, you've set that up, you feel really, really good about it. You want to set that up in a way that then you use it consistently as that particular text setup for your brand. And you can create that in Canva. Then you want to move on to your other brand materials. So you want to put together an attractive color palette. This is for my brand. I usually recommend about 5 colors, and you can pick one color to be your main sort of highlight color. And then the others are supporting colors like for website or your other collateral. So don't overdo it and try to use every color in every application. What I actually recommend for you guys to do is Google color palettes. There's so many out there. You can actually find boards like this that will give you 5 colors together. You could Google like organic color palettes. So use your keywords and Google that, and you'll be able to find a lot of different directions you could go. And the goal of a color palette is you want them to be the same tone and saturation. But again, you don't necessarily need to understand all of the visual reasoning behind a color palette when you can go online and search for color palettes and find one that's already got the same tone and saturation, and you know that it already works together because someone put it together. So again, there's all these resources, and then there are color pickers you can use as well. But if you don't know color theory, then just use the information that's out there. There's so much and so much to choose from that there's no point for you to have to sit there and like figure out, you know, what level of yellow and magenta you want in each color. So pretty simple. And then your goal, you're just trying to find the hex color code that you can use on web so that you can be able to apply it to all of your materials. All right, so now you've created your logo, and that's a type-based logo, which also means you know what fonts you want to be using. And you're going to keep it really simple. You're just going to use one font for your brand. You can use it as bold or italic, but just keep it very, very simple. And then now you've picked your color palette, which is going to have maybe up to 5 different colors. That's part of your palette. You figured out their hex codes, so you can be able to apply it to your print materials or your online materials. And now you no longer have to go back and forth and try to decide what color you're going to make something when you're taking the next steps in trying to market yourself. That's something I see a lot with new businesses, is just there's a lot of confusion and overwhelm in how to try to start off. And simply by defining your font and your color palette in the most simplest brand guidelines sort of way, you can take away all of that confusion as you move into online marketing for yourself. And I find for myself as well, I have to go through this step of branding myself. I do my own mood boards like this, and I do the keywords. I do the whole process myself as well, because if I don't, I end up in that same confusion, overwhelm place. And I also think that's when we fall to really trendy solutions, because there's so much good stuff out there. Someone else is probably, you know, doing some really cool iteration of a website design or whatever. And it can be really easy to get distracted with what they're doing and then think it looks better than yours. And so all of a sudden you're changing your color palette to, you know, mimic them, or, you know, changing to use imagery that's just like them. And when you brand strategically with the brand foundation, even on your own, you can always go back to those initial steps and know that you have a unique story. You've come up with clarity around your audience. So you don't have to do this back and forth game anymore because you're not creating a trendy brand. You are clear about what you're serving, what you're providing to the world. So your service or your product, and then you're clear about who you're talking to. And so the nice thing is, as you check off each of these steps, you don't have to go back every day and reevaluate them. You might in a year or half a year want to go back and see if your business has evolved in the same way that you originally thought it would. So it is good to go back and check out those materials, but you don't have to fall to trends. That's probably another big trap I see non-designers fall into. I mean, how many circle logos that are teal have we seen with like a script font for some woman's brand? Or, you know, remember the hipster cross that people would use and stuff like this. They're all trends that don't last over time. And probably were used a bit arbitrarily. So maybe someone thought it looked cool in the moment, but maybe there wasn't a lot of reasoning behind why they were using it. So as long as you're clear about the choices you make, that it probably will stand the test of time better than random graphics that you find or someone throws your way or looks cool in the moment. So I just wanted to share this brand. Of course, we made this. This is for an Alaska brand. They do like expediting services in Northern Alaska. So you can see here we have their color palette, pretty simple. They just had 4. And then the rest of their materials was figuring out how to convey their sort of outdoors, you know, very service-based industry through their designs. And so it doesn't have to be very fancy. You could be pulling color imagery. You could be pulling like some graphics. So maybe here you could have some icons that you're using for your brand. Again, I recommend keeping it pretty simple, but it is nice to combine some graphics with your photography that also work well with your fonts and your colors. And this is what starts to make a full brand. And we eventually put this all into like a brand guidelines document that informs on what is on brand and what would be off brand. So for example, for this brand, something that would be off brand would be like a really city based imagery, or, you know, like even really dressed up, like super urban setting, because everything they do is in a really remote environment. So they're really trying to appeal to this kind of like hardy and sturdy environment, and helping people understand that they're capable of setting up these remote camps. And I do have some resources too, where you guys can find some visuals and inspiration on how to build this for yourself. And again, it's all about just keeping it simple. You know, you can use like a simple sort of shape system to help convey your brand, but it doesn't have to be over the top. So yeah, last is your DIY tools, and I have a lot more for you guys if you want to shoot me an email, because there's just a lot out there. But off the bat, the really simple things are Pinterest for inspiration. For some reason, Pinterest has better visuals than like just Googling images. And you can Google things like website homepage design for yoga studios, something like that in Pinterest, and you'll get a lot of really great things to pull from, which is pretty great. I really like this visual design brief tool. You can go through it and it actually takes you through kind of each step we talked about. So it's like, what sort of imagery do you like? What sort of styles do you like? It helps you really define each of those things. It's a cool little platform, so it's worth checking out. There's actually quite a few free stock image sources. So Pexels, there's a few others. So you can find free imagery that's quite good. You don't want to use stock images. We always say that like stinks, like stock imagery. So like really stiff, you know, people in a meeting, and it's very obviously, you know, not your your team. So you want to be strategic in imagery that you do choose, so you come off authentic and connective to your audience. And so again, you can always go back to your keywords and your values to help you figure out what are the best ways to convey those aspects through your visual brand and your photography. And sometimes you're just looking for like textures or things like that to help convey your brand as well. So I recommend using Google Fonts, keeping it really simple, sticking to one and at the very most two typefaces, but there's really no point for two fonts in a brand. Just keep it simple and use one. We always change one element at a time. So I might change the size of the typography or change it from regular to bold, something like that. But these simple hierarchical changes are enough to help the viewer read the information. So that would be another trap non-designers fall into, is just all these changes throughout a document. Have you ever like looked at a menu and it just it's overwhelming with the amount of content, as well as like there's 5 different fonts and then it's overlaid on top of a graphic, and it's just too much. When you try to say too much, it actually detracts from the entire thing. Your tool for design is going to be Canva, and they do a free trial. So, and they also have a lot of templates to use, and it's pretty user friendly from a non-designer perspective. So that's a great place to start with any of these pieces and start playing with visuals. Of course, after you've done the foundational pieces we talked about in the beginning, so that you're not just jumping into visuals without guidance on what you're trying to say with your brand. Because I would say if you're not clear about that, then even a professional designer, it's hard to brand someone if they're not clear about those things, because we have to figure out what we're trying to tell your audience, because that's what we're doing. We're trying to communicate through not only written word, but also the visuals to your specific audience. But if you are unclear about what you're trying to say, then that makes it very hard. And then also for websites, to be honest, for all the DIY sites I've seen out there, the only good ones I ever see are from Squarespace. So I do recommend them in terms of if what you're going to build your site on. We use WordPress in my agency, which of course we love, but we can design that. So we have, web designers, and then we also have developers. So I know a lot of DIY people do Wix, which I just can't promote because I've just never seen a good site out of Wix. I think there's just too many choices. So a platform like Squarespace, it already has sort of a theme you can play with, and you're just changing a few elements, not everything. And so it kind of simplifies it into a way that's tangible and digestible, I think, for kind of the DIY approach. And you definitely want to do all the steps we talked about today before you go to web, because you're going to need those hex codes of the color palette. And I choose 5 specifically because that's often what you need for a website, and make 1 your highlight color. So keeping things pretty simple. You're going to need your logo file that you can build. You can build that in Canva, and then you can export it. And so you're going to need that for your website. You're going to need your photography and graphic inspiration. And also you're going to want to compile that as you're coming up with your brand, so you can be uploading that to your website. So if you do each of these individual pieces, by the time you get to the website, you should have what you need to be able to build something that comes off professional and hopefully modern and attractive and all of these things. I think that's it that I'm going to talk about here. But again, email me, and I can send you a lot more resources on how to go about this. Also, if you guys have questions in general. So I think that's it from me. Here's my email, adele@livelargedesign.com, and I'll shoot you guys over my document with a lot of tools. And I also wanted to talk to you today about if you made a DIY brand and then eventually down the road wanted to go to like a professional designer, whether that's an agency or a freelancer, what that would look like. Essentially, if you do the steps that we talked about today, that's all of the foundational pieces that will support a professional branding experience. So if you DIY, let's say this year, validate your idea for your business and start making money, then in a year, you'll probably have the budget to put in to work with a professional designer. And then you can go through this really extensive conceptual iterative logo process so you can build that logo that will last you for 10 years. But all of the work that you've done, it's not like it goes to waste, that it's always going to support the design process for a professional as well. And understanding like who your audience is, knowing who you're speaking to, what market you're in, what your unique brand story, all of these pieces come together in the foundation of your brand. And I don't even build visual brands without that brand strategy piece, because I just feel that they're so inherently tied together that it's important that they both are relatable to each other. So that's always where we start. So anyway, it's just a little bit of encouragement that all of these steps help build a brand, whether you do it for yourself or down the road want to evolve your business or your brand that you worked on into something a little bit more, professional or evolved with a graphic design team. And usually that transition can happen pretty smoothly if you have kept things pretty simple in the beginning. Sometimes I've seen organizations that build a brand that maybe has the really like ornamental logo, and then they've printed everything. This might be like an organization, a brick and mortar business in Alaska or something. And then they want to rebrand. They have to go through this really big process because they've put that brand piece on all of their print materials. If you go the route that I've talked about today, it will be a smoother transition because all of your initial materials will be so simple and clean that you'll just be adding a new layer on to the brand when you're able to do that. And then you can slowly evolve things. And probably most likely not many of us have printed materials anymore. We're all online. And so the digital aspect is a bit more easy to update when you get there. But I think that's it for me. It's a little bit weird to not have audience feedback in this moment, but I think there might be some questions that people can post, I suppose, on Facebook. So I don't know.
Yeah, so we'll jump into a couple. Thank you again, Adele, for sharing your branding expertise and also your
Yeah.
time with us. It's been a pleasure to host you on Outpost Virtual Series. A couple questions. So what are your thoughts on the quickest way to gain trust with potential clients?
That's a great question. Well, the way I market is very network based. So I believe a lot in like authentic connection. And I would say that value piece I talked about, and I include that if you guys email me, I'll give you a value tool so you can figure out your top 3 values. And what I find with businesses is that our values are never very far from where we are personally. So my personal values are like freedom, growth, and then I think love and connection. Those are probably my top 3. And then in business, I see those really similarly exuded. So I think that's a great way to build trust when I find people who also value freedom. Like that's such a, positive sort of synergy that's created quite easily. And I also would say like with my team, we work with a lot of impact-driven platforms. So everyone in my team is motivated by working with those sectors. And so it just creates a flow between us that's on top of me giving graphic design jobs. They also care about the clients we're working with. I know that's a little different than the question because the question's specifically towards building trust with customers. But I think thinking kind of in that big picture of like, what are your customers' values? And then trying to speak directly to those. I do another talk where we go a little more into each of the steps of branding for impact. And in that one, I talk a bit about like trying to figure out your customers' pain points. So if you can figure out their 3 main pain points, you actually can turn those around into your value proposition. So I would say for me, my clients that come to me, they're often like overwhelmed or confused about how to brand. So I'm trying to support them in a clear strategic system where it takes the guesswork out of the branding process for them. So yeah. Hopefully that helps.
Very cool. And at what stage do you typically find that your clients are coming to you? Are they typically at an obstacle in their branding, or are they stuck on a certain project, or are they just getting started? But what is the ideal time for a client to reach out to you for your services?
Yeah, no, it's a super good question. And that's always something we're refining as well, because it's different for every business, right? If you get funding and you have a couple grand to put into the branding process in the beginning, potentially you do it that way. But I like to tell people, I think it's very important you validate your business idea. Like you need to know that it's going to work before, you're putting too much budget into branding. And that's why I wanted to create this talk, because there's this weird time in between, like, so you have an idea and then maybe you need a year to validate it. But what do you do with your branding in that time? You can't look like unprofessional, but yet maybe you don't have the budget, or you just want to make sure that your business is going to take off. So that's why I think coming up with a simple, clear, professional looking brand initially could be the solution. And once you start making money, you should be making money before you brand professionally. And you have to be super clear about who you're talking to, so your audience, and then obviously like what you're selling. Without those 2 things, I can't brand you in a way that will be the strongest solution. I can do what I talked about today. I can make a clean brand, but the more you know about your business, the stronger the product will be for the designer. And so I think going through today's process would help most business owners get really clear on these things. So when they do spend the money to brand, it would be all that much more beneficial.
Yeah, very nice. And what is I'm sure this comes up quite often, but what is the biggest common challenge that you have while working with many clients? Like, what are they coming to you most often, whether it's an obstacle or branding or What is that commonality if you could boil it down to one challenge that your clients are coming to you?
These are good questions. I think visibility, so clients are coming to us when they want more visibility, which is great, right? Sometimes we all do this where we think one solution will solve our problem. And so some people come to me, maybe their business isn't working in the way they hope, and they think branding will solve it. That might or might not. It's definitely a step in the right direction, but if a business doesn't have legs, branding isn't necessarily going to solve that problem, right? So yeah, I think they're coming at that place where they want to scale, but they're really confused and frustrated on how to do that. Like, imagine going to Facebook and you want to make a post about something that you're doing, and then you have to like pick a color and a font, and then you're just overwhelmed and you're like, screw it. That's usually the point when you're like, you either need to clarify these few simple brand foundational things for yourself, or you can gather help to do that. And if you have a great business idea and you know some of those brand background pieces, then I think that really is the perfect time to look into evolving it a bit further. So.
Very cool. Awesome. And one other question is, how do you politely tell a client when something doesn't align with their goals or their market audience, whether it's their logo is not ideal, or they're stuck on something that they like about their brand, but it doesn't quite align with their vision?
Yeah, no, these are great questions, guys. I always say feedback is love. So I try to train my team and my clients that way. So like, when people hire me, they're paying for my real feedback. But let's say a client rolls in and has a specific idea of what their logo is going to be. We take that in, but then we iterate. We do, like I say, 100 sketches. We're coming up with what we're going to present to them. We'll make sure to present their idea as well. And generally our ideas, are probably going to be stronger because we went through all these different sketches, So I try to incorporate what's, important to a client. But I think there's a way to politely direct them back to the audience. So when I build a brand for a founder of a business, it's not about them. It's not about them liking the color red or what their favorite shape is. It doesn't matter. What matters is the audience that we're speaking to. And so that's always what we take them back to. And I think when clients get a little confused or hyper-focused on something they like that you feel isn't going to work for them, then I think going back to the brand foundational pieces. So in my agency, we write a design brief, we do a strategy session, and we nail all that down in writing. And then we do content analysis as well as competitors analysis. So all of these supporting materials, we can go directly to a competitors analysis and be like, here's what we found in your competitors. So are you sure you want to make this decision? Because from our research, that's contradictory, And then at least they're informed. If they make a poor decision, they're like, we know why we're making it and we're going to make it anyway. And then you're like, all right. So.
And last question here is, I know you said, picking a main font is the way to go, but a lot of brands have main and secondary fonts. What are your thoughts on this, and what are maybe some ways to do it correctly, or some pitfalls that you could run into?
Yeah, totally. Well, if you email me, I'll give you a link to this guy who does really great typography support, I guess you would call it. So he does some great type combos, and you can actually go, and any of his type combos you can trust. But there's a strategic way to pair fonts. So if you're not a typographist, then I don't know if that's the right word, but if you don't know what you're doing, be hesitant to just choose random fonts and put them together. So for example, I never choose two different sans serif fonts and put them together. There's not typically a reason to do that. There might be occasionally, but I'd have to be very clear about why to do that. So then I'm like, okay, stick with one. Maybe I'll pair a sans serif with a serif, and then I would want them to match each other in a variety of different ways. And that gets really technical. So my suggestion is I think it's Typewolf, but I have it in my guide for you guys. He gives a lot of really nice type combinations. So you can check out his suggestions. And I just try to find like trusted sources and then just know that those are going to work together. So and then you also want to make sure they're Google fonts if you're doing a website, because you can run into not being able to find them on Google, which is just annoying. You're probably not going to want to pay for like an extra font. So.
Well, thank you very much, Adele. Everyone tuning in, please email Adele and so she can share this guide with you. I think it'll be very valuable for everyone trying to kick off their branding efforts. And yeah, everyone give it up for Adele. Thank you so much for your time tonight. And,
yeah.
And we'll speak soon.
Awesome. Thanks for dealing with my technical challenges of my first Facebook Live.
It was a pleasure having you on. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yep. And don't forget, everybody, to block your calendars for this Friday at 7 p.m. Bali time, or wherever in the world that may be for you, for our next virtual Skillshare on freedom from limiting beliefs with Sabi Kerr. So until next time, stay well, and we'll see you all soon. Thanks.